Force, a quality of movement. This lecture is intended to introduce you to the concept of force, although you may come across it by different names. A force is a quality of movement. Movement has to do with the direction your eye travels through the page. A movement can be described as vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. Think of yourself at one end of a room moving to the other. There's a straight horizontal movement. Force is the quality of that movement. So how did you get to the other side of the room? Were you walking, jumping, skipping, rolling? This would be the force. So visually, you might have a directional movement, but the more sophisticated version of that movement would be a force showing a particular distinctive quality. Here are images with the forces of twisting and hanging. Both have the same directional movement, but a very different quality to that movement. In this discussion, we'll reference two main sources: Forms in Japan by Yuichiro Kojiro and Richard Serra's Verb List. Both offer a list of descriptors to qualify movement with terms like to bind, to weave, to join, and which droop, which flow, or which swirl. In Forms in Japan, the author attempts to classify all forms found in Japan. The author discusses his approach, saying, "It would have been very easy if we'd begun separating these items by materials, but such classification would have lessened the value each form possessed. We wanted somehow a classification that would embrace first of all the various origins of forms in such a way as to reflect Japanese history and climate, and that second would also include the purpose, idea, material, hand aspect of forms. In other words, we adopted a classification system founded on the forms themselves." The author uses categories and subcategories to organize the lists of forms or forces included in the book. For example, under forms of unity, there are forms of collection, of heaping, of bundling, of layering, and of piling. Under forms of force, there are forms which support, forms of tension, and forms which hook or hang. Hopefully this list and these pictures, rather than limiting you, inspire you to seek out more visual characteristics that could be named. These forms can become important objects in your designs, but more importantly, their repetition and interaction can lend a sophisticated quality of movement to a work as well. Forces can be naturally occurring, like the swirl of a seashell or the twining of roots as they grow from a tree. Or they can be man-made, such as the joining of traffic interchanges, or the heaping of haystacks, or the piling of house upon house in a shanty town. While some forces are man-made unintentionally, artists understand the power of forces and employ them with awareness in their work. Look at how Spanish architect and photographer Dionisio Gonzalez combines existing urban structures with digitally drawn architecture to create modified slums. If not for his understanding of the forces at work in the original structure, he would not have been able to respond to them in such an interesting way. Other artists are even more direct about their use of force in a work. Andy Goldsworthy's Storm King Wall emphasizes the idea of winding, as it takes an almost unnecessary number of twists and turns on its 2,278-foot journey. Goldsworthy is a British artist known for his site-specific installations involving natural materials and the passage of time. Goldsworthy crafts his installations out of rocks, ice, leaves, or branches, and then carefully documents his collaborations with nature through photography. He says, "It's not about art. It's just about life and the need to understand that a lot of things do not last. Even more overt still in his use of forces is Richard Serra, titling his pieces To Lift, Slow Roll, and Stacked Steel Slabs. His verb list guides both his process and the content of his work. Here's the artist discussing his process in his own words.
When I first started, what was very, very important to me was dealing with the nature of process. So what I had done is I'd written a verb list: to roll, to fold, to cut, to dangle, to twist, or whatever. And I really just worked out pieces in relation to the verb list physically in a space. So basically it gives you a way of proceeding with material in relation to body movement, in relation to making, that divorces you from any notion of metaphor, any notion of easy imagery. I think what artists do is they invent strategies that allow themselves to see in a way that they haven't seen before, to extend their vision. But I think one constantly tries to invent ways of seeing into what one's doing so you don't get into some lockstep notion of how to do what you do. I have to kind of invent new strategies in order not to go back to something that's just a reflex action.
An understanding of how movement and force work can give you an added understanding in works you already appreciated, as well as offering a new way of looking at works that may have previously seemed incomprehensible to you. Additionally, force can inform your own artistic process. By giving it a role in your work, you can add complexity to your compositions and interest for your viewer.